Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a brand new iteration of this miniature series I have going on here in the channel, to where we are creating several Skylanders rankings based on the different teams of Skylanders found from all of the different games, leading our way slowly but surely up to ranking all 167 unique Skylanders for the second time, so I can revise my list and have it finalized, so then I never have to do it again, because boy, these videos have taken a lot of work out of me. They've taken about 10 hours each roughly, and this one here involving the Senseis from Imaginators are no different. There's 31 of them, so that's gameplay I've had together 31 times. But with that being said, then it's about time I showed you the glorious shot of all 31 Senseis, so then I can simply create the voiceover, and naturally I can point out the very fact that this cast is rather expensive. It's featuring 3 incredibly rare characters: Chompy Mage, the green version specifically, Robo and Wildstorm. I feel so honoured and so lucky to own such prestigious figures, and the Sensei cast is just so strong that this ranking them from worst to best is definitely going to be a difficult task. So there's definitely going to be some hot takes on here as per the norm, so as always, let's just be respectful of each other's opinions in the comment section below. But now that we're back with my face, mind you, it's time for me to conclude this and actually get into the ranking of said senseis without further ado. So let's be rolling the intro and getting straight on into it. To my biggest surprise, my number 31, when ranked up to the others, there just is no comparison. It's Crash Bandicoot. Now, sure, he's Crash Bandicoot, and that alone is pretty awesome, but the moveset, on the other hand, not so much. The moves do chain together, there's no denying that, but unfortunately the character's not all that fast paced, and he's just not nearly as powerful as he needs to be neither. His attacks take forever to actually defeat enemies, and that's a shame considering that all of the other senseis in comparison are so overpowered. So ultimately it's Crash Bandicoot's lack of balance, really. Sure, they made a fun moveset out of him, but it didn't make an effective moveset out of him even, and that's where the main downsides for this character lie. Hence number 31 on the list. And also, the design isn't as original as other Skylanders, because it's not an original design, it's a design taken from another game, and so naturally, the figurine just isn't as exciting as all of the other Skylanders. It definitely fits, that's what's so great, the fact that they were able to fit Crash Bandicoot into the Skylander style. But I just prefer more original Skylanders characters rather than guest star Skylanders characters, and so that's another downside to Crash Bandicoot, I suppose, all leading him to number 31 on the list right here. But as for number 30, we have Aurora. Now, let me just put emphasis on the fact that I like all of these characters, Aurora included. I think her design is pretty cool. I love the attention to detail, especially since Eon can be seen embodied on her chest armor, which is awesome, and her posing is pretty cool as well. She definitely looks rather nimble and maneuverable, which is exactly what a swashbuckler should be. And then she's incredibly fast-paced and speedy, like she is basically the speed of light, as her catchphrase would imply. But unfortunately, despite the fast-pacedness within her moveset, just like Crash Bandicoot, is not really all that effective. In a lock, for example, Aurora will always be the first one to be defeated by enemies, just because her attacks don't deal as much damage as they need to be able to deal with them effectively. That, and also her moves don't really have a flow to one another. You just kind of like go from performing one move into going into another. There is no natural chain, so her combos aren't the greatest, and naturally that can be rather disappointing. There's also a surprising lack of maneuverability considering her speed. Sure, she can dash, but whenever she's conducting a primary attack, in particular when she's constantly jabbing her double swords, she can't really turn all that well, and so because of that, enemies that sneak up behind you damage you very easily, and that's where the lack of efficiency comes in within her gameplay. We're going to move on to number 29 without further ado, which is going to be Buckshot. Easily one of the biggest disappointments for his design compared to his gameplay, because his design is so good. I mean, we're talking about this mythical goat-like creature with a bow and arrow, no pupils and everything, to ultimately look really intimidating. with sharp contrast and colours to top it all off. But then for his gameplay, sure, it's unique creating portals and then being able to fire your arrows through those portals, and it can create the unique strategies. So the distinctive playstyle is what elevates him up the list, but unfortunately his moves are some of the weakest in the game, and he really struggles, especially against horde of enemies, with a lack of knockback, a really high amount of end lag, and a charged up move and a tertiary attack, which just aren't all that good. So naturally his gameplay is the biggest letdown of any Sensei, just because he's not nearly as powerful nor as intimidating as the design would imply. But I do love his animations, so the fact that you can hear him galloping as part of his sound effects is really cool and a great attention to detail. We're going to move on to number 28 now, which is going to be Starcast, easily one of the coolest designs for a Skylander I've ever seen. He has this galactic type look to him because you can look into his body and see stars and blackness. It really does mesh in well with the dark element, and he has 4 arms, all of which have stars, ninja stars held within them. That's just total awesomeness, and I love the design. Unfortunately, the moveset is the most maneuverable, especially when you're atop his surfboard thingy, to where you can barely turn on it, but you have a lot of power in that form. And on top of that, the stars deal decent damage, but it's his invisibility that ultimately saves this guy, because you can turn invisible, enemies can't attack you, so you can easily sneak upon them like a ninja would, his battle class, but you also leave behind the shockwave, and that deals a huge ton of damage thanks to that clone of yours that also distracts enemies. So ultimately, Starcast, whilst not having a great primary attack button that can't really be used effectively to mash because it's just so weak in comparison to other Sensei moves, he does have other things and other strategies to make up for all that. However, moving on to number 27, we have Boom Bloom, a massive fan favourite, and it's honestly easy to see why. Her design is awesome, and with her having a whip, it's very unique and pretty cool. Not the most traditional ninja weapon, but it's a welcome change up to make the character just all the more distinctive and memorable. And her gameplay, man, do her moves flow together. It makes combat itself such a blast, and she's definitely more powerful than the Senseis preceding her, just not as powerful as the ones coming up from my own experience of her. And on top of that, whilst the moves do chain together and it makes combat fun, outside of combat she's a really slow-paced character. She's dull, you could go as far to say, and her moves just don't really feel like anything we haven't seen before. We've seen whip attacks before, we've seen plant attacks before, so the moveset isn't the most memorable in my personal opinion. So she's fun, but that's about where the upsides of this character begin and end for me personally. Again, I can definitely see the appeal, but I can't just be of the same opinion, unfortunately. That's not how opinions work, or is it? So moving on to number 26, without further ado, we have Bad Juju. Bad Juju has a really strategic moveset, and that's really cool to see. Now, her figurine is not the most exciting. Sure, it does have sharp contrast and colours and a nice attention to detail to make it really stand out on the shelf. But outside of that, it's rather basic. She just has the traditional swashbuckler look. Sure, she's perfect for the battle class, so I'm glad they included her as the perfect villain to become a swashbuckler. But outside of that, she's just not the most exciting design-wise. But going back to that moveset, what makes it so strategic is that you can launch out Juju Jr., you can leave it in place, and then enemies, as they are drawn to it, you can create your lightning blasts that target Bad Juju Jr. even. And then you can also, whilst you're doing that, be swashbuckling enemies all around you with the swords, and then you can bring Juju Jr. back to you, so you can use that for knockback, spacing and all that. It really reminds me of the game God of War, when you can throw out your axe and then you can bring it back to you as you attract enemies towards you, and then the axe winds up hitting them in the back and dealing more knockback damage. So yeah, being able to have an object out on the battlefield and then bring it back to you and hit enemies with great knockback every time it hits them on its journey back to you. Really unique moveset. It's something that's not really explored by Skylanders. The only thing that gets close really is Star Strike with her reflection orbs. But ultimately that makes Bad Juju really unique, and the fact that you've really got to learn and adjust to her strategic playstyle makes her really rewarding to players. And we're still only at number 26 right here, mostly because outside of a strategy the attacks can be quite boring, but it just goes to show you how great the Senseis coming up are. Senseis like Dr. Neo Cortex at 25, who becomes a real big beast once you fully upgrade him, mind you. You can have attacks They're just dealing stupid damage at stupid rates. And not to mention all of these attacks all complement one another, so every time you throw out one attack, it's making another attack even more powerful. And that gives this character a lot of flow within his moveset. He's powerful, he's well overlooked too. Dr. Neocortex is a lot better than people let him on to be, I suppose, because before you upgrade him, he is a pretty garbage character. Straight out of the box, he's probably the worst Sensei. But once you upgrade him, man, it all becomes worth it. Not to mention he has a lot of personality too. So that's great to see. They carried it over well. Same with Crash Bandicoot. Actually, that's Crash Bandicoot's highlight, his personality. And Dr. Neocortex is no different. Without further ado, we're going to move on to 24, which is going to be Grave Clobber. A character with some really cool combos, and he has just such a huge amount of power. I mean, we're talking punches that do 100 plus damage here. Not to mention he also has cheese. You can create like a line of your water geysers and then jump out of it, so your water geysers remain there. It's a quick summon and it deals all sorts of area damage, but again, this is a character that all of his moves complement one another. You can punch and kick your water geysers to deal more damage to them, or create belly slams to use as a projectile and knock back enemies. Either way, the moves flow together. He's a really fun character. He is unfortunately slow paced, so he suffers for the same reasons as Boom Boom, I suppose, even. And for figurine, it could be considered quite boring, but I love just how bulky he is at the top, and then how small his legs are. You know, a rather out of shape character. It reminds you of what you can make out of the Imaginators, with the fact that you can have a really buffed up top half and a not so much buffed up bottom half as well. It's just a really interesting proportions for this character that just emphasises the cartooniness of the game, I suppose, and there's a great attention to detail as well, with excellent colour contrast on top of it all. But moving on to number 23, we have a Dr. Crankcase. This guy's attacks are epic. You can fire off goop and then spin straight into it and fire that goop all over your enemies, or you can launch your hats into the goop to level them up. You could go as far to say to have them deal more damage. Now, what's unfortunate about Dr. Crankcase is that both of his paths are really good, so you want to play as them both, but you can't, and that's disappointing. But outside of that, unfortunately, he, again, isn't the most manoeuvrable character. He can't really turn all that well whilst he's spinning, and so he can't really avoid being hit all that well. But that's more than made up for the fact that he has plenty of range to defeat enemies from afar. He can be a blast, and from a personality standpoint, he is one of the strongest. You know, I suppose that's an area where Grave Clobber suffered previously with the lack of distinguishable personality, but Dr. Crankcase has that in boatloads because he's a doctor and they do a great job, you know, working around a comedic flair with that to make Dr. Crankcase many things, and memorable most certainly is one of them. For number 22, I have Kingpin. Now, a penguin with blades along his arms. It's such a cool idea, and it's executed to perfection within the gameplay because the moves flow together very, very well, and he definitely justifies his element with all of his ice-based attacks. His combos are really well animated, and they're ultimately what make the entire moveset flow together, making Kingpin the perfect example of a brawling type Skylander, you know, a character who brawls with his enemies up close and personal, almost toys with them, and doesn't even give them a chance to attack because they're so busy using their own combinations to be attacking what feels like 24/7. So the infinite amount of attacks and strategies you can go into combat with Kingpin makes him really fun, but he definitely is a lot more basic in comparison to his other fellow senseis. You know, his attacks, he has like a dash, he freezes at other enemies, and he has his melee combos, but outside of that, you know, the moves aren't all that distinctive nor memorable. So ultimately it's the basicness of this character, I suppose, which brings him down for me. That, and also when enemies do hit him even, and when they really start crowding around him, he's not the greatest for crowd control, especially before you've upgraded him. Like for Kingpin you see before you, that's a lot more on the weaker side. It can be rather frustrating, him not being able to deal with said crowds all too well. But moving on to number 21, we have Chopscotch. Well, this character, there's a little basic design department even, which is where her main flaws come in. She's, you know, just an orb, but the giant axe and the detail upon said giant axe and for the orb itself, it's really cool. Her ponytail is held up by a little bone, which It's a really sweet idea. It's just unfortunately the very shape of this character being so small and so round that reminds me of other lazier type designs like Wrecking Ball and Eruptor that are just orbs with arms and legs pretty much. But outside of that, this character's really good. She has great knockback even, and despite being a smasher with all this power, she's still incredibly quick. So she has that fast-pacedness behind her. Again, her moves flow together really well. You can go from a spinning attack into lobbing her head quite easily, but lobbing her head isn't a very fun move to use. Sure, you spin it around you for the sake of crowd control, but you can't really turn whilst you're trying to initiate the attack, and that lack of maneuverability can feel rather frustrating and slow-paced at times. In fact, saying that the moves flow together was a bit of a lie, because you just kind of like transition from one move into the next. It's not really that much of a flow, it just feels like it flows because the attacks themselves are pretty quick. But still, there could have been greater pace with this character, and with some more maneuverability, I'm sure she would have been even better. But as it stands, she is strong, she is quick, and most importantly, she's fun to play, giving her the perfect 21 on the list. But moving on to number 20, we have Golden Queen. Her attacks serve to always complement one another. She can freeze enemies with her golden-based slam down, and then those frozen enemies, when you bring about your turrets and your staff-based projectiles upon them, it gives you gold. So she's a great adaptation of her original form from Trap Team, we could go as far to say, with, you know, all of the gold parts carrying over. Her turrets remain as well, so they definitely brought back the best parts about her. Her figurine is also really incredibly detailed, and it's nice to finally have an Earth character in her starter pack that isn't the Dark Edition of Swap Force for once. So yes, Golden Queen has some nice flow within her moveset, and she's fun to play as, more importantly than not, so that gives her number 20 on the list. But moving on to number 19, we have one of the biggest surprise of any Sensei, Mr. Cat, purely because the design isn't really all that much to write home about. It's very similar to that of Nightmare, so it becomes less memorable as a result. Mr. Cat doesn't really have much of a personality, if I'm being honest. So the only reason you're really left to play with Mr. Cat is for gameplay, but the gameplay is so damn good that it makes it all worth it in the end. You can keep your distance very well thanks to the fact that your projectiles are fast and effective, and on top of that you can bring out clones to deal increased damage and distract enemies. So again, those moves all complement one another. Even for tertiary attack allows you to turn invisible and then create a sneak attack. So sure, once again that makes Mr. Cat's moves a little less distinguishable because they are the same as other characters preceding him, characters like Enigma and Double Trouble. But apart from that, I still love the moveset. It's a lot more effective than what you'd expect given the design, and that just makes Mr. Cat an absolute blast, and more importantly, a massive surprise for me. But number 18 is going to be Hoodsicle. Man, I love the animations on this guy. They are really smooth and have a fine attention to detail. And his melee attacks turn into projectile attacks. At the end of a spinning spree, you can send off a shockwave. You know, you can dash forward too, and the dashing makes it so you're a lot more maneuverable in the arena, and that makes the character a lot more fast-paced. The design is also really intimidating, as it should be, with really excellent texture, and even you can rub your hand along and truly feel like you're going along a hood. For example, the colours are a bit blocky, however, there's a lot of black and far less purple, gold and silver to contrast those colours, so because of that, you know, it remains the design looking intimidating and all that, which I suppose is more important than the colour contrast, but it still would have been nice to have this character stand out a little bit more. But still, I love the attacks here, they all chain together very, very well, and it makes Hoodsicle an absolute blast to play as. However, moving on to number 17, we have Pit Boss, a character that has significantly rose up my list. Originally, he was barely within the top 30, but after having played him some more, I've realised just how overpowered this character is. You can leave behind your little snake pools as you know, manoeuvre around the arena with ease. Your projectiles are fast and very effective, and they complement your little pools of snakes you leave behind as well by putting more snakes inside of them, and not to mention when you jump out of your snake form that clutches onto enemies, you create an explosion and another pool of snakes. So overall, there isn't a single moment where you're not attacking enemies here, and Pit Boss is just incredibly fun and fast-paced to utilise. And despite being a snake, he still has a really distinctly memorable design, because he's unlike the other snakes we've seen before. He has a massive staff, he has a bit of a cloak rather than being your traditional snake type form. So yes, it is unfortunate to see yet another Snake Skylander that has been done twice before now, but the fact that they're able to expand upon the Snake designs and to make this one distinguishable and memorable is ultimately a testament to how great Pit Boss is. But moving on to number 16, we have Ember. Her animations are smooth and fantastic. I love her design too. She's a samurai with a dual fire blade for Pete's sake. Now the attacks aren't the most effective, but what's important is that they flow and they are fun. So sure, while she doesn't last in combat as long as literally either of the other two fire Skylanders due to her moveset not being as effective as for both of them, that's easily forgiven with how fun her moveset is, how easily it flows together. So yes, not the most powerful Sensei, but most certainly one of the most fun ones. I'm saying this twice just to put emphasis on it and all that, but regardless, for number 15 we have Pinata. Now first of all, I love his figurine. It has so many different colours that are all really contrasted. It makes Pinata easily one of the most standout figures in the entirety of the cast. He also has a massive lollipop that spirals and it looks cool with a great attention to detail. So the figurine is textured well, it looks intimidating, there's that sharp colour contrast that you want. So you literally can't go wrong with a figurine. It's probably one of the greatest figurines ever produced for the Skylanders series. And neither can you go wrong with the gameplay either. It's fast paced and it truly lives up to its smasher type, because you can literally wallop enemies with your melee attacks and they will be annihilated. You can create, after a certain amount of attacks, a massive explosion that speeds you up, and then for second time around, that explosion after you have like your disco party mode active, it freezes enemies in place so they have no chance to attack you. So yes, this character's maneuverable, and again, all of his moves flow together very well. It is a shame though how long his projectile move lasts. It can leave you a bit vulnerable, and again, you're not the most maneuverable utilising it, so that's probably the downside really, and it's not nearly as powerful as the other two attacks, so you might as well just stick with the other two attacks, and the lack of motivation to utilise that secondary attack is rather disappointing. But it's still there to freshen up gameplay a little bit if you're getting tired of just mashing for other two attack buttons. And hey, what's more important is that this character's fast-paced, he's fun, and he's effective too. He's really great against crowds of enemies. He's not the greatest boss killer, however. He can't really focus in on bosses all too well, and that's the main flaw of this character outside of the secondary attacks weaknesses, you could say. But that's what gives Pinata number 15. So moving on to 14, without further ado, we have Wolfgang. Now, a few months ago, this character would have been a whole lot higher up the list, but it turns out that Wolfgang's lower health bar doesn't really help him out at all, because he has a large hitbox and it's very easy for enemies to hit him, so that can make him less effective in combat. Also, he's a werewolf, but I don't have any natural bias towards werewolves. I don't find them that cool of figurines, and all what Wolfgang's figure is a werewolf with a bow and arrow. You know, it's not nearly as clever as other Skylanders designs. It still looks cool, and I love the proportions. The really big, bulky and buffed up top half with the lower bottom half. It looks really, really cool. Again, it's just not the most creative nor fleshed out design of all the Senseis. And moving into the gameplay, the fact that you can use speakers drawing your space in, and then you have very powerful arrows, each attack complementing one another, and then your slide can really help you dash around the arena and then knock back enemies also. It makes this gameplay fun and effective, but again, the main problem is that lackluster health bar. But we're going to move on to number 13 without further ado, which is going to be my most surprising Sensei, Barbella. I call her my most surprising Sensei because the design is nothing to write home about. It's just another rock golem which we've seen done time and time again, so it makes Barbella really, really forgettable. Of all the Senseis, she has easily the weakest design, but that's easily more than made up for with how much I love her gameplay, and that's why she is the most surprising character of all of them, because not only do her moves flow together, but they are insanely powerful, and she has a huge bulky health bar, so enemies don't stand a chance at defeating her because she's so damn good. Her jump and attack flows together very well. You can create little earth like spiky balls from your clap and attack, and then they are jittered around, I suppose you could say, with all of your melee attacks, and then in the third melee attack you create just kind of like a wall of rock. It's so overpowering and fun because it's chaos, it's destructive, and yet you're the one who's controlling it. It's so fun to know that you're playing such a broken character. But we're going to move on to number 12 without further ado, who is also a pretty broken character, that being Chaos, who has the most unique gameplay of any Sensei really, considering that he has a combination of all of the battle classes. You can either spam projectiles or spam melee attacks. Either way, you have really fun and flowing combinations and animations, and on top of that, it's really effective too. You can easily jump out of things and create a jumping attack where we can see Chaos's oversized head. And then you also have Doom Sharks, which is perfection because they are by far the greatest part of any iteration of Chaos, mind you. So ultimately, you just can't go wrong with this character. It's full to brim with fan service. It has some of the most unique gameplay I've ever seen, with excellent animations and strings of attacks that flow together quite perfectly. And I really, really enjoy playing as Chaos. But with that being said and done, number 11 is going to be Chompy Mage, a character that I enjoy playing as even more because he has a tool for any situation. And on top of that, his figurine's also awesome. The texturing makes his clothes feel like actual cloth. And I love the attention to detail on his Chompy puppet too, even though the colours again are pretty blocky. It's a lot of reliance on green, so there aren't too many sharp contrasting colours. But still, the design is brimming with personality, though I do wish that they actually gave him his bazooka for figurine, considering he is a bazooka. But hey, him tossing away his staff and bringing out a bazooka in the loading up screen is what creates a much more smoother transition between the figurine and the game itself. So, you know, I'm glad they went through the loops to generate that attention to detail, you could go as far to say. But it's about time we went back to that moveset and talk about what makes it so overpowering. The very fact that you can knock back enemies with ease using the Chompy puppet attacks, and then you can also dash around in your tertiary attack, and then once you jump out of it, it remains out. So the ball of Chompies is still dealing damage to enemies. And speaking of Chompies, you can maintain your distance because your bazooka fires off Chompies at an insane distance, and then, you know, all of a sudden you have 5 or 6 of them in combat at once, and they are absolutely creaming everything around you. They are honing in on enemies, they are attacking them, they are chomping them to bits, and man, it is hilarious to see just how broken this character can be, because enemies aren't going to get close to you, you're keeping your distance, and yet you're there attacking. Where the gameplay is nowhere near as great, but his design is so good. It's probably my favourite design Skylander ever. The fact that he has bicycle chains as a beard, and then he has massive fuck-off chainsaws, and just a huge amount of attention to detail and excellent texturing to bring the design to life is so cool. I really admire this design for its just raw creativity. Whoever drew up this design, I hope they got promoted. It's just that good of a design, and I love it. But the gameplay, on the other hand, is unique. I like the fact that you can strike an enemy and it deals damage over time, but unfortunately that damage is so small that it makes chain reaction amongst the weaker senseis. Fortunately, he has his combos and his huge knockback to make up for that. And again, you can be dealing damage to enemies at all times. You can create your little fans and then deal melee damage to a different enemy whilst those fans are drawing in enemies from a different direction. So that can be effective in of itself, and you also create orbs with all of your melee attacks down a particular path, as you can see from the gameplay before you. But ultimately, this guy's massive hitbox means that he gets hit very easily, and because enemies are defeated slowly with this guy, it can create some very frustrating moments where you get some real bullshit deaths. So that's about where my nitpicks and flaws with chain reaction begins and ends, really. Now we move into single digits, with number 9 being none other than Tri-Tip, a character who has just such raw power, and it's so fun to harness this for yourself because you can pound down your mace and create really fluent animations, like he front flips to smash it down for Pete's sake, and then on top of that you can chain your dash attack with your fossils to create explosions. So overall, yes, this guy is slow, but the power more than makes up for it. You can also deal with crowd control easily because his baseball swing knocks back enemies and deals with basically everything 180 degrees in front of you, so it's a very effective swing at that. And Tri-Tip's design is also spectacular. You can't go wrong with a Triceratops that has a massive mace, for Pete's sake. And the irony of this character too, being able to rain down a meteorite, considering that meteorites are what caused for dinosaurs' extinction in the first place, and this time Tri-Tip even is kind of like reflecting that tragedy upon his enemies, and he's creating their extinction with it. It's so cool. The irony is very clever and well thought out, and overall I love Tri-Tip. His design has great attention to detail, sharp contrast and colours even. So naturally you can't go wrong. But speaking of characters you can't go wrong with, at number 8 we have Ambush, a character inspired by a lot of Chinese martial arts, I believe. His animations are literally based on sword fighting ninjas of that culture. And on top of that, the sword itself is incredibly detailed with, engravings and all that. So it just creates a lore of this character that's really unique. And he has a really cool gimmick to where your patience becomes your greatest weapon, because if you stay still with a character, it charges up his blade, and that creates high risk, high reward. Do you wait to power up your sword, or do you go in and strike an enemy so that then they can't really hit you all too well? Because staying still, it does leave you to be quite vulnerable. But on top of that, the bamboo attacks just flow together very well. You can dash in, create a wall of bamboos around you, but then fire that off and create a bamboo shield on top of that. So when you're up close and personal with your sword attacks, that bamboo shield is also dealing damage. Every attack flows into one another, and it makes Tri-Tip fast-paced, and just not Tri-Tip, Ambush even. It makes him fast-paced, because Tri-Tip is the opposite. He's not so fast-paced, but for just raw power you have is ultimately what makes him fun, but Ambush is fun for different reasons, and that's the pacing and the flow to his moveset. But moving on from there to number 7, we have Airstrike, yet another character whose moves really flow together. He is the perfect brawler in the fact that his attacks chain together so perfectly, and he can truly utilise them to really mess his enemies up. You know, they're getting up close and personal, and his enemies really want a piece of him, but he ain't having it. He can maneuver around the battlefield with ease thanks to his maneuverability. He can create shockwaves to pull in enemies and just deal damage with his air all around him. Then his bird slams down, and all of the crystals you left behind explode. So ultimately, for trails, for strategy, it just makes this character really effective and definitely fun, to be saying the absolute minimal. So that leads us on to number 6, which is Blastertron, a fan favourite Skylander, and it's easy to see why. Not only is it really cool to see his futuristic type sword with a great attention to detail, in fact the entire figurine is really well detailed, and again it's bulky, it's well proportioned to make it more cartoony, and it really stands out on the shelf thanks to the purple and white contrast. But the gameplay is truly where this guy stands out. You can create combos that deal constant damage to enemies within the area. You can rain down a laser that's done automatically. It's just as effective as Tri-Tip's little meteorite smash, for Pete's sake. And the fact it's done automatically, you don't need to press buttons for it. You know, it means you can defeat enemies by doing absolutely nothing. So with that being said, on top of that, you also have your sword that can flow between its projectile form and its combo form so easily, and you can even create an orb that slows down enemies, and you fire off your rockets into it, and all of a sudden you're dealing projectile damage before you even get up close and personal to finish off opponents. So Blastertron has a tool for every situation, and he is so fun, so fluent, and so fast paced. How could I put him anywhere other than number 6? But kicking off my top 5 is going to be Taekwon Crow, a character with a really memorable and distinctive personality. He's loud, he's charismatic, and it's such a blast to interact with this character. But for gameplay, it more than makes up for the fact that he only has 600 health, because enemies don't get anywhere near him. You can kick up a fire circle with a roundhouse kick that's well animated and replicates real life martial arts incredibly well, and then you fire off your little ninja stars through them to literally fire them up and deal huge damage. Or you can charge up your ninja stars and create massive knockback, and then they return back to you like boomerangs. This is 500 damage we're talking about here, and it's insane, and it barely takes any time to charge up too, and you're maneuverable enough whilst you do it. You can also bring in buzzer beaks to deal increased damage, so you're just creating even more layers upon layers of damage, because the ninja stars clearly they weren't enough, so instead they went overkill and gave him for buzzer beaks too, which again is a great way to harken back to previous games from the franchise for the sake of fan service, since Buzberbeak was a prevalent character in Trap Team, and Trap Team is my favourite game, so, you know, seeing that honoured here, it just really warms my heart. And Taekwon Crow is an amazing character for it. But moving on to number 4, we have Robo, a character that you basically have to love because he's so darn expensive. And it's with good reason that he is as beloved as he is amongst the Skylanders community, because his attacks are so good. Not the greatest boss cut, I must admit. He has the same flaws as Pain Yarder even in that department. But when it comes to singling out enemies, the fact that his arrows are drill heads and they literally penetrate through enemies into the next one in line, it can make him really effective. His laser also allows you to deal increased damage with his drill arrows, and when you're in your secondary attack form and then you jump up and press a primary attack, though that's a combination of events that is really great for flow in, power, and fast pacedness. But unfortunately, that's really the only strategy with this guy. He doesn't have as many tools to vary up the strategy and the gameplay every single time you play as him, so he can become dull after playing with him for too long, and that's ultimately the main flaw for him in comparison to Wildstorm, which I think is the better of the two notoriously rare characters in this game. And what makes Wildstorm better is the fact that he has more attacks, more strategy behind it, and every single time you play with this guy, it feels fresh and fun and different to, compared to the last time you played as him. Now, first of all, his projectile attacks are amazing and work for all the same reasons as Blastatron, because he can easily transition between his projectile attacks and his melee attacks with just raw power, and his deep voice creates just such an intimidating atmosphere of him. Then you can create clouds which you can electrify. His design also takes Thunderbolt, which was a great design to begin with, and expands upon it, making it more detailed and just more cool to look at. His sword is really unique with its cool details and embodiments. And man, you just can't go wrong with neither the gameplay nor the posing of this character and the design in general. I love it, and it's worthy for number 3 because there are only 2 senseis I love more than Wildstorm. One of them being Tidepool, a massive favourite of Judas himself, and it's easy to see why. Tidepool deals damage to enemies all around her with ease, thanks to just the flow within her moveset and the excellent animations that just truly add to her attention to detail. Is what makes her transition between the figurine to the game so strong. And she's built up from marine type objects. You know, she has coral hair, she has like a mussel shell, she has fish scales going down her legs. So she leans into her element quite perfectly, and then her pose as well, it makes her look nimble, and it just makes her look like a character you want to play as. So she's full of detail, creativity, and a fine personality as well to really add to the pacing of this character. So her effectiveness in combat is unparalleled, she's incredibly fun, her attacks flow together very, very well, and I thoroughly enjoy this character. What's wrong with her? Well, the one singular flaw I have with Tidepool is that she's not as good as Flarewolf. That's right, my favourite sensei is Flarewolf, for the sheer fact that he has a massive bazooka with a dragon that spirals right round it, which has a great texture, a great detail to it, and overall that bazooka looks like it will be so overpowering towards your enemies, and you'd be right in thinking that, because boy, can you deal a lot of damage very quickly with this character even. This is one of those few characters where he's so fast-paced and his attacks move together, flow together even so well that he increases how much fun you're having with the game at hand. He makes Imaginators a better game when you're playing as him, because not only can he dash forward and create knockback that makes him easier to single out with his bazooka, but he can also create rockets that loop around him. He can blast off to the moon and fire rockets down, and he's completely unhittable during this phase. And then he can also create, yet again, more knockback with his fire-based ability that comes out of his bazooka, and you can even charge up to create a massive spiraling rocket. His character is destructive, and it goes along with his wild personality that's distinctive and memorable. So overall, Flarewolf is a bit on the wild side, and it's so much fun to harness that chaos and destruction for your own doing. You love playing this character. He is so fast-paced, he improves Imaginators' quality and pacing tenfold, and the very fact that he makes Imaginators a better game is what emphasises the very fact that Flarewolf is and shall forever be my favourite sensei. Now, with that all being said and done, this video is coming to an end, but before that happens, I first want to thank all my Blazing Knights and Scorching Dragons whose support allow me to continue pumping out quality videos like this one. Without them, this all wouldn't be possible. Therefore, I genuinely appreciate every last one of you from the bottom of my heart. If you enjoyed this video, I have others you can watch by clicking on screen now, and you can even subscribe by pressing the button on the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next one, but until that moment arises, peace!